Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Hello and welcome to the Albany Book Festival. I'm Ed Schwartzchild. I'm a fellow of the New York State Writers Institute, and I'm director of creative writing at the University at Albany. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here today with Ishmael Beah, an internationally known best-selling author. And we're going to talk a bit today about his new book, Little Family, and we'll also be talking a bit about just the writing life during these difficult times. Ishmael, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I thought we would start, if it's all right, if you could just tell us a little bit about the start of Little Family, how that project emerged and how you brought it into being.
Well, generally, when I want to write any book, it starts with a curiosity of wanting to answer a question or wanting to understand more about a certain situation. For this particular one, Little Family, I wanted to answer this question about what freedom and liberty means for young people nowadays anywhere in the world, but particularly in contemporary Africa. Hence, the book doesn't specify a country because its experiences could be anywhere. How do you find freedom when you have the traditions, then you have an import of ideas that are coming in as well, and you have a version of yourself who you want to be? Which do you embrace? Do you embrace little bits of all, or do you just completely cut yourself from everything and find a new way to be? And so you have 5 young people who, through different circumstances, have ostracized themselves from society, and they are trying to do just that. And so and the books, I started observing in various African countries that I've lived in Senegal, in Mauritania, in Sierra Leone, in Nigeria. I started observing how young people are operating, and I decided to create characters based on those observations and my imagination to answer this question.
Mm-hmm. And 5 young people. I mean, 5 doesn't seem like a giant number, but it is a large number for a novel in a way. To sort of give them all equal weight, or to figure out how to tell the story of all 5 people. And I really admire some of the structural decisions you made in the novel, which must have been, I imagine they were difficult to come up with over time. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you, thinking about our audience of young writers and things like that, or some writers who are, less young than others, but still learning their craft. How did you figure out how to tell the story of your central characters in this particular way?
Well, every writer has their own different way they approach characterization. But one of the first things for me is that I have to be faithful to my characters at all costs. I have to know them deeply and have backstories about them that may not even make it into the novel, just to have an idea of how to, talk about them and how to get into their psychology, their mannerisms in the narrative. So for me to do this, usually what I do is that before I sit down to write anything, I spend about 6 months or even a year just making notes and thinking about the characters without writing the story. So if I say I'm going to have a young girl is going to start when she's 16 or 17, I'm going to think about what is that young girl like? Where do they live? How do they carry themselves? How do they feel? What is their backstory? And so I do that for years, and I make little notes to myself. And then one day I would just sit and write because I've known them so much. I would just sit and write. And also when I'm writing, when I have a lot of characters like this, I try to think about it as a family. If you have a family, just like the title is Little Family, if you have a family, say you're a father, I'm a father, you're a family, you have 3, 4, 5 kids. You give attention to all of them as they grow, right? You don't neglect one for 1 week and take care of one for 1 week and then come back to the other. You have all kinds of problems, both for yourself, but also probably legally speaking, So So when I write, I always have this in mind. But there's also a natural connection to when our lives intersect with each other. How we, when you're having a conversation, for example, at a table, you start talking and people pick up from your conversation, and then the conversation just flows around. If you have good conversationalists. Now, as a novelist, obviously you make all your characters good conversationalists in that sense, that the story flows from one to the other. So that's why I really spend time making sure every character is felt as deeply as possible, even though there's a central character, that nobody feels like they were not completely thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you. And it makes me, I mean, I don't think I'm giving too much, I don't want to do a spoiler for the book in any way, because everybody should read it. But I think if I just talk about the first 2 pages, that's okay. I mean, in those 2 pages, it's slightly different from the rest of the book in terms of that second person, the you that opens up the book. And I'm wondering, is that something that you knew from the start, or where did those opening pages arrive as you wrote the book, and what was behind that decision to give us that essentially a prologue in a way?
I mean, it was something that was at the very beginning of the book, because I felt that I was inviting the reader into a world that was very unfamiliar to them, into the world of people who have decided to leave society as it is. So therefore, I thought, what device could I use as an invitation to the reader to say that here you are coming into our world, but also to give agency to the characters, because these are characters that you never really hear from. These are people that are at the bottom of society, who people don't think are intelligent or have anything to give. But I believe human beings who are actually at the margins of society are the most intelligent ones in sort of observing the society that supposedly functions, because they see the cracks. That's why they are not in it, right? So I wanted that invitation, but also to give the characters their own agency. So in that short 2 pages, you understand that they're telling you, come into our world, and this is how you're going to come into it. And this is how we're going to tell you our story. And you will not have anything to say about it, but you just have to come in the story, right? Because it's also, for me, was also giving agency to the characters. They invite you and they say, and when you read the book also, you don't have a lot of backstory that most people learn in writing classes, that the characters have to have this backstory so that you can develop, empathy or sensitivity, or you can be invested in their lives. I did not want to do that, because again, when people are experiencing certain realities, they're not going around thinking about, well, I reacted to that because my grandfather once pushed me. They don't have time for that, because they're living the moment, right? But how people behave in the present says so much about what their background is, right? What they say, people don't realize that. Like the way you react to a certain given situation is not because of that moment, it's because of everything that's layered within you. So the other device I wanted to use also was to do that you will learn about them. For example, one of the characters, Devui, Eliman, who is a bookworm. He loves books. He's a kid who lives, on the street, if you will, or he lives in an abandoned plane, but he's always reading. And so you already know that, well, he must have grown up with books, which says that he must have had a certain kind of family, right? I did not need to explain all of that. When he was young, he was reading a book, the reader. Also, for me, when I write, I feel like my reader, I believe in the intelligence of my reader, and I want my reader to make certain conclusions. So the story becomes theirs as well. Because if I give everything, then you read it, you're like, well, I didn't read.
Yeah, that makes, I mean, the you has to enter into the story. The you, just as you're saying, it makes it even more powerful.
But as a professor of writing, this is like a no-no, right? Like most teachers would tell you, you cannot.
Oh no, I would never say that. I mean, I would say that probably, I don't know if it's, it's probably equally useful or useless, but that sort of cliche about all rules are made to be broken, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who tells you there are these fixed rules to tell a story, you probably shouldn't trust them. So I think it works. I think it does incredible work in really small space for the book. But I do wonder, in terms of your writing career, what it's been like to move from memoir to fiction. And you mentioned the kind of, it seemed like you were saying when you observe and when you chose your characters for the book, there was a kind of a research element to that. in a way. I mean, you could have written a book that picked out 5 people and told their stories in a nonfiction way. But in this case, you decided to write fiction. And since your memoir, this is your second novel. What has it been like for you to make that shift to fiction? What are the upsides and downsides, or challenges and rewards of doing fiction rather than memoir? That's a pretty broad question, but however you want to come at it.
Well, I think, for me particularly, my first work was a memoir. And it didn't come out of the fact that I wanted to be a memoirist. It's just that was the story that I really wanted to tell first. That was the story that wanted to come out, and I had no more space for it within my psyche and my spirit, So it just happened to be that. But in the writing world, what happens is that when your first book comes out, like mine did, and it has a lot of success, you get categorized as a memoirist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just not as a writer, but as a memoirist. But so there was always a struggle to start with that, where I felt like, well, first of all, the reason why people read that memoir and they like it is because I made certain choices as a writer to write something that was true. I didn't write everything that happened, but I picked moments to make a story that was very compelling, that people can read and stay with it. So the same techniques apply to fiction, right? The only thing is that this one, the facts were there, and I couldn't play around with words and imagination. It was the facts of what had happened. But I still told it in a way that it remains with you, So those were my writerly literary devices, right?
Yes.
But yet, you're not considered a writer, you're just a memoirist, right? But for memoir, it's the story is kind of set. I knew what had happened to me. I just was afraid to return to it. It was difficult to return to it. I had to choose which aspect of it to tell. Whereas fiction, I love writing fiction more. That's why I moved to fiction after that, because I can create a whole world. I can observe people, but then I can draw conclusions from the observation, completely my imagination, I would do things, I would play with language more. I would decide what character lives or die, what character is more compelling, which one is annoying, which one, whichever I want to do, I can do, And so I think for me, that's how fiction is liberating in that sense. It allows you to do more with the craft without those barriers. And also, but I think particularly in the West, the idea of truth is very singular in a lot of people's mindsets. So when you write a nonfiction, for example, everybody wants the truth to be the same truth that everybody agrees to, And I grew up in an oral tradition storytelling, where as a young age, I knew that truth is plural. Because again, if we are sitting and experiencing, like we're having this conversation, if we were both to go and write about our chat today, they will both be very different, but still be truthful to the fact that we had a conversation, right? Yes. Because how we talk, what we say to each other, how we react to it is different because of our backgrounds and all the rest of it, right? So when I was writing nonfiction, I was very confused about that, where people wanted my experience to mirror everybody as they've met. And I'm like, well, it can't be. First of all, I'm from a village. Some guy was from a city. I'm a village boy, so when I run in the bush, my relationship of running in the bush is very different from somebody who's from the city, who may be their first time running in the forest, So you see, so all of a sudden my experience can be anyway. So for me, I love writing fiction because I think it really opens the door to do more with language, to also inhabit characters that are not like you, so that you can actually expand your own muscles of creating characterization that you don't have. In Little Family, for example, the main character is a young woman. I'm clearly not a young woman, but I had to think and feel as a young woman, which was very new to me, but I even had to learn how to describe the clothes of women, how women wear clothes, how they feel. I think most guys, I'll speak for myself, I'm a functional dresser. I just wear what is functional. I'm not thinking, oh, this makes me feel a certain way. I don't really. But I could not bring my own thinking to that character. So, so it allows you to also learn about yourself, about how you see the world, and, in that way.
Yeah, no, it makes, and the book, it seems like in I don't know if it's the epigraph or the dedication for the book. I mean, it seems like there's a direct connection, or direct is too strong a word. There are connections to be drawn between your own making of a family and the writing of Little Family. And if that's too personal a question, we can skip over it. But if you don't mind talking about that, I would love to hear.
No, absolutely. I'm a father. I have two girls, you know. So when I was writing some of these characters, some of them were informed by me imagining what they would be like as young women and the types of young women I want them to be, who have their own agency. They're not going to allow anybody to tell them how to think or feel. They're going to be free in their own way, whatever that is, you know. So I was thinking that, and some of it came from that reaction also. Being a father of any child, I think, is a blessing. But if you're a man and your first child is a girl, you have a daughter, if you have the willingness to really critique yourself, you will realize how you've been part of a larger problem where the world is so masculine and only caters to really men in a way. And women kind of have to fight to get a piece of it all the time. So when you become a father, if you allow yourself, you're honest, which I was. And at the same time, I was writing this book, so I have to be honest to my characters. So I really had to go in and look at what is it that this world is to women. And one of them, the trigger for one of them was, I was in Senegal and we were crossing from this island into Dakar. And my first daughter was about a year and a half old. You know, she has long curly hair and everything. And there were these older men and some younger men chatting in French, but in a way most people do in African country, where they will say things out loud so you can hear them, even though they're not talking to you, but they're trying to hear, you know. And they said, you know, basically, but how come they don't pierce her ears so we know right away she's a girl? And I thought to myself, why would a man demand that of a girl who's a year and a half old? What business is there for a man to decide how a girl should be feminine or how they should carry themselves as a girl, as a woman? But that's where it starts, right? So, and then these, you know, and so that really fed into how I wrote Kudimata, the main character, because I wanted her to go against those kinds of things where she becomes herself. So there are moments like this as a father of two girls, and also observing, living in the world as a man, seeing it while I was in the midst of the book, and that just triggered things in them to say, okay, I'm going to go shop in that part of the book because I want people to see the strength and beauty of a woman, you know, of a Black girl, particularly, who has intelligence and who's not just, you know, it's not just going to subscribe to the standard that men set for her to live, you know.
Yes, yes. No, that's really powerful. It's really powerful. And it makes me think of another question I wanted to ask that maybe moves us a little bit away from Little Family and just towards a more, towards a question for our audience about becoming a writer or working to hone your craft in this particular difficult time. I mean, you're talking about how a man writing a woman character can learn some really crucial things about how to be and think about the world. And I'm wondering if, just in terms of writing more generally during this pandemic time, what have you been thinking about how to be as a writer as the world works its way through this rough moment? How does it change your approach to writing? When is it too soon to start writing about the pandemic? Is it too soon? Or what is a writer's responsibility in a moment like this? Is it any different from what a writer's responsibility is all the time?
I think it's too soon for anybody to write about a pandemic, but that's just my thinking, because for me, I believe that for you to have a deeper exploration of an experience, you have to allow it to sit within your body. Mm-hmm. You know, if you jump at it real quickly, I think you miss a lot of things. And also, everybody's going through the pandemic all over the world. So if you write something, you better have something that's better than I was just at home, you know, because everybody's been at home and going through the same thing. So that's what I'm saying. So there are going to be people who rush to get the next pandemic novel. And most of them, I guarantee, are going to be terrible because they rush too much. Yes. You got to allow this to sit within you, to allow it to, or connect it to another reality that's bigger than just the pandemic. If you just write about the pandemic, which requires time, that's again to my point, I think. But for me, you know, I think the role of a writer in these times is kind of remains the same, really. We always are home or away from people writing. So for us, isolation has been quite a welcome thing in a way. The only things that everybody has come to our spaces where we're usually left alone, you know. That's the only difference for most of us. And for somebody like me, I've lived through so many different crises in my life. So this is just another additional crisis in the list of things, you know. So, but for me, I started writing specifically because I wanted to give context to how human beings behave and exist in crisis. And for a number of years, all my books, whether it's a memoir or fiction, has tried to open a small window into the realities of the other that seems so far removed, how people become the best of themselves in the worst situation or in the backdrop of something so bad or significant, but yet they're able to thrive and really achieve great things. So that's what I've always written about, because I grew up believing, and I still, this is why I write, that stories are medicine that are poured into human beings so that it can strengthen them to be able to face life, to live life, to be able to add a little bit more to humanity that's positive. So for me, that work is even more essential right now than it has been before, because we're all going through the same thing. And there are people out there who probably want to get out and go back to the way things have been. Well, guess what? Things may never get back to the way they have been. If you wait for things to return to what it has been, you are going to have a lot of problems, because they are not. So, but how do you operate in this moment? How do we realign ourselves and reevaluate ourselves, because we've forgotten that we're each other's keepers. And again, through my work, that's what I've always said, how when we forget we're each other's keepers as human beings, things start to fall apart and eventually reach where we are. A lot of people before, I remember having a talk with a friend of mine who lives in New York City, who was a very avid, one of our arguments has always been that he felt that in the United States, that there was such a question of individualism that's really great for the human being. I always said to him, yes, individualism is great, but there's also community. You can't forget that. The African way, the Ubuntu, is that I am because we are. Yes, you can be individual, but don't forget the community. And he said, no, I don't need anybody. He's struggling through the pandemic because he realized he actually needs people. Something I've been trying to tell him for years, that yes, you can be individual, but guess what? The idea of just seeing another human being, whether you say hello to them, adds something to your spirit. But when I used to write about things like this, some reviewers would read it and be like, well, this is just one of those utopia thinking. It's like, no, this is real because I've seen it. I've observed what these things are. Anyway, so for me, my work is easier now in a way. I always say that, yeah, I've been saying this, but I would say it again another way. Now that everybody is wanting to listen deeply, let's write it.
Yes, the world is proving you right. And we certainly all need the medicine you're describing more than ever.
Absolutely.
Maybe one last sort of question before we have to go. Are you willing to talk about what you're working on now? Or are you too busy? I mean, I know we've talked earlier about Narrative 4 and this book is still new. So I don't want to be one of those people who's like, well, what have you done lately?
But that already happened with my publisher. That's as you know very well. That's what, my editor already, as soon as this book came out in April, she was like, so I was like, really? Can I just, is the pandemic also, can I just like relax a little bit?
Yeah.
But I have, for years I've avoided trying to do it, even though I knew that there was a book there that and a lot of people wanted some to know what happened. So the next thing that I'm working on, which I have a contract for my publishing house, is the sequel to the first book, to the memoir.
Okay.
Because it ended where most people wanted to know more. And I had done that deliberately because I felt it was a different story. So for years I've avoided trying to write it, but I think it's time now that I do that. And then I'll move on back to fiction. And then maybe if I live until I'm like 90 years old, then I will write the autobiography, It will be one page with lots of empty pages. It will be, he lived. So write yours in these following pages. That will be it.
Well, it's great news to know that book is on its way, Ishmael, and it's good to have something to look forward to, now more than ever. But thank you so much for spending time today. And I want to remind everybody in our audience that all of Ishmael's books are available via a link on this page. And just once again, we're so grateful that you made time to join us at the Albany Book Festival. And just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for a wonderful conversation.
It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.